Hey, what's up everybody? It's Izzy from PowerliftingToWin, and due to the many requests that I've had, today we're going to be reviewing the Smolov squat cycle. We'll also briefly be looking at Smolov Jr. for bench. Now, Smolov is every masochist's favorite program. Now, there's tons of claims out there that Smolov can put up to 100 pounds on your squat in only 13 weeks. The only thing that these claims are exceeded by is the absolute brutality of the program. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that more lifters quit Smolov or get hurt trying to do the program than anything else out there on the internet. So in the rest of this review, we're going to go ahead and look at the elements of this program that allow you to make such potentially tremendous gains while at the same time causing so many to burn out. Smolov, as you may have guessed from the name, has Russian origins. In fact, the program was first brought to light by Pavel Tsatsouline in a 2001 Powerlifting USA magazine article. Now, while Pavel may have been the original messenger, distinguished master of sport Sergei Smolov was the original composer of this Russian squat routine. The program is intended to be run strictly as a shock cycle. This is not something that you're supposed to do all year long. This is not something you're supposed to do in a caloric deficit. In fact, this is not a program that you can do if you're going to do deadlifts. The program is explicitly designed to produce massive short-term gains on the squat. Unless you need massive short-term gains on the squat, there's no reason to do this program. It's designed for that, and that's the only purpose that it has. Again, this is honestly not a program that you decide to give a shot. Smolov is something that you need to take very seriously, and unless you need a huge gain on your squat in a short amount of time, I wouldn't even consider doing the program. Again, the whole point of Smolov is to beat you up and force your squat to improve quickly. Okay, we're going to take a look at the actual Smolov program. In the description box, I'm going to include a link to the spreadsheet for you guys. So if you want to view the program in its entirety right from the beginning, go ahead and go to the description box and get yourself a copy of that spreadsheet. Smolov can roughly be broken into 5 different phases or cycles. One is the introductory phase, the other is the base mesocycle or the base phase, the next is the switching phase, followed by the intense phase, and finally you finish off with a meat peak or a taper. We're going to start off by taking a look at the introductory cycle. As you can see, the introductory phase features thrice weekly squatting for 2 weeks. You're going to be working up to a single at 90% of your best squat in week 1. In week 2, you'll be working up to a set of 5 at 85% of your best squat. These 2 weeks are simply in place to allow your body to adapt to the frequency and workloads that you'll experience in the base phase. Many people skip the introductory microcycle, but if you're a first-time Smolov user, I highly recommend against this approach. Do the introductory cycle. Following the introductory phase, you move on to the base mesocycle phase. Let's take a look. On the base phase, you're going to be squatting 4 times per week. That's right, 4 times per week. Not only are you going to be squatting 4 times per week, but each session is going to be more than 30 working reps as well. Hell, at the end of each week, you're going to do 10 triples at 85%. And it just gets harder and harder. In week 2, you're expected to add 20 pounds to the work sets you did in week 1. In week 3, you add another 10 pounds on top of what you added in week 2. So by the last workout of week 3, you're doing 10 triples at 85% plus 30 pounds. Is it any wonder that this program results in amazing progression for those who can survive it? So just as a brief note, a lot of people were also asking me about Smolov Jr. Smolov Jr. is just the base mesocycle from the Smolov squat routine with a few small adjustments to make it easier. So let's dig into it a little deeper. The only differences here are that instead of doing 4 sets of 9 on Monday, you're doing 6 sets of 6. Instead of doing 5 sets of 7 on Wednesday, you do 7 sets of 5. And instead of doing 7 sets of 5 on Friday, you're doing 8 sets of 4. So the volume is maintained, but the reps per set are reduced. This actually makes the program easier by reducing the cumulative difficulty of each set. It also tends to make it a bit more specific to powerlifting because the lower reps allow you to maintain proper technique more easily. But make no mistake about it, this adjustment is simply made to make the program easier, and it's why a lot of people choose to run it for bench this way. Overall, though, it's important to note that any criticisms that would apply to Smolov are also going to apply to Smolov Jr., because they're essentially the same thing. The switching phase is essentially a transition block between the base mesocycle and the intense phase. Let's take a look at what this looks like. The switching phase focuses on dynamic effort work and other alternative training means, such as squat negatives and whatnot. However, the focus here is less on whether or not the athlete actually gets faster, and it is more on the contrast in loading between the brutality of the base mesocycle and the loads used for this type of speed work. Speed work allows lifters to produce medium to medium high levels of force despite using relatively light weights. This is going to help prevent detraining while allowing for serious recovery. And after the 4-week base phase, you need some serious recovery. It's worth noting that power cleans and box squats are just examples here. You can really do any movement which is either plyometric in nature or keeps the load below 60 to 65%. The last part of Smolov is the intense phase, which was actually designed by a different coach than Smolov. It was designed by I.M. Feduleev, who was a renowned weightlifting and powerlifting coach in Moscow himself. Now, the intense phase is designed to help you transmute the gains that you made in the base mesocycle over to your 1 rep max. So let's see how it does that. It should be obvious that this is an absolutely brutal mesocycle. While you're only squatting 3 days per week, the intensity is outrageous. In week 1, you perform 54 lifts over 80%. In week 2, you perform 54 lifts over 80% as well, but 43 of those lifts are above 90%. Contrast this to Westside, which has you doing 2 to 3 lifts above 90% per week. In week 3, you only perform 47 lifts over 80%, but you do 18 lifts over 95%. And week 4 is the most insane of all, featuring 55 lifts over 80%, 48 lifts over 90%, and 24 lifts over 95%. Needless to say, if you survive, you're going to be ready and primed for those heavy weights and big time PRs in your future. The last phase of Smolov is the meat taper, which is listed here as week 5 of the intense phase. As you can see, Smolov is brutal right to the very bitter end. Only in the very last week of the program do you truly rest and reduce the workload. Even then, the peaking week on Smolov is probably more intense than what you do on regular weeks during most American programs. Smolov is an advanced program and it uses quite complex periodization, so let's break this down. The first phase is the introductory cycle, and the introductory cycle really just serves to condition the lifter to the volumes and loads that the real Smolov is going to be using. It's just a few weeks to lay some base conditioning so that you can survive the base mesocycle. Now, the base mesocycle itself is primarily aimed at overall hypertrophy and work capacity / volume tolerance. Here's what I mean by this. If you look at the rep ranges, you're doing 9s, 7s, and 5s. Yes, there is one day in there where you're working at 85% with triples, so it's not 100% hypertrophy oriented, but when you're doing multiple sets of 9 and 7 for most of the week, that's going to get you some serious mass on your legs. And in fact, the whole point of the base mesocycle is to condition you to such high volumes and to build up some extra muscle mass so that when you get to the intense phase, it's actually a reduction in volume, and this will allow you to take advantage of the new muscle mass that you've built and transmute it into gains on your 1 rep max. You can see that these different periods are working together. Now, the switching phase is a classic transition block. It's somewhat of a deload, but in terms of periodization, it's also a period where you're going to be working on speed strength. The primary purpose here is to give your central nervous system a break from the super heavy, super taxing loads, while at the same time keeping it primed for heavier efforts. Because the thing about speed work is even though you can't exert maximal force on submaximal weights, by trying to lift it explosively, you can exhibit more force than you can just lifting the weight with the minimum amount of effort. So it allows for recovery while keeping that nervous system primed for the intense phase, which is next. So finally, the intense phase is a maximal strength period. And this is where you take all of that volume tolerance that you built up during the base mesocycle, all of that new muscle mass on your legs, and you try to convert it into a new 1 rep max. It should be obvious that the intense cycle is just ridiculous in terms of intensity, because any program that has you doing more than 20 reps at 90% plus every single week, well, that's going to be intense for sure. The name is definitely appropriate here. And of course, the last week, the meat peak week, just allows for you to recover so that you can display the gains that you made during the intense phase and set a new big time 1 rep PR. As I already touched on a little bit, Smolov follows a basic block programming outline. So to begin with, you have a conditioning or introductory / preparatory period where for 2 weeks you just condition your body to be able to handle the more rigorous loads that are coming up in the following block. So the first block of the program, the first real block anyways, is the base mesocycle. And the base mesocycle can be thought of as a volume block, also known as an accumulation block. And what you're really doing here is doing high amounts of volume and just beating the crap out of yourself so that you accumulate a ton of fatigue. The next block is a transition block, and it's called the switching phase. Now, the switching phase serves primarily in terms of the programming to give you a deload period so that you can recover from the beatdown that you got on the base mesocycle as you transition into the intense phase. But it also has some unique properties because you're training speed strength through the speed work. Now, the intense phase is basically where you transmute and realize the gains that you built up during the accumulation phase during that volume block. So you can think of the last 4 weeks on the intense phase as a transmutation / realization block. And of course that culminates on the very last week of the program where you go through the meek peat / taper in order to get yourself ready to demonstrate your improvements in a contest scenario. So as you can see, Smolov holds fairly true to a rough outline of block programming. And as such, the program is best suited and programmed for late stage, intermediate, and advanced athletes. Although Smolov is in common use among powerlifters, the ironic thing about it in terms of specificity is that it's not a powerlifting program. It is a squat routine, and you're going to be emphasizing the squat to the detriment of pretty much everything else. This is not a program you can do in a caloric deficit. This is not a program you can do if you want to improve your deadlift. You're not allowed to deadlift on Smolov. Also, for most of you guys out there who aren't used to such high volume programs, you're probably going to need to taper down your upper body volume as well. So like I said, this program emphasizes the squat to virtually the detriment of every other aspect of your powerlifting total. So as a powerlifter, unless you just really felt that your squat was lagging horribly behind and holding you back as a competitor, or maybe if you're on the cusp of an important record, why would you consider Smolov? It's not going to be what's best for your total. If you need a period of specific focus on the squat, well then Smolov might be your answer. But overall, in terms of improving your powerlifting total, this is not a powerlifting program, it's a squat routine. As we discussed in the Shako review, the program suffers from the problem of diminishing marginal returns because you don't really use any variations on the squat whatsoever. Consider the base mesocycle. You have not but 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 squat sessions using the competition style squat. Now of course this is going to be great for helping you develop your technique, but it suffers from the problem of diminishing marginal returns. So remember, in terms of diminishing marginal returns, here's how this works. The first time you're exposed to a stimulus, you might get 100% reaction to that stimulus. However, the second time you're exposed to that stimulus, you're going to receive diminished benefits. So if you go tanning for 15 minutes, the next time you go tanning for 15 minutes, it's not going to make you as tan as the first time did. And the same thing holds true when you're talking about doing the same movements over and over and over again. So just to pull some numbers out to make this more realistic, or at least to give us a context for what I'm talking about, let's say that the first time you perform the competition squat in the week, you get 100% carryover to improvement on the competition squat. Now, the second time you perform the competition squat, you might only get 80% return on your training investment. The third time you perform the competition squat, you might only get 60% return on your training investment. And maybe by the fourth time you do the competition squat, you're only getting 40% return on investment. Now let's consider a movement like front squats. Obviously, front squats are quite different to back squats, so you're never going to get 100% carryover from improving your front squat to your back squat. But maybe you get 50%. And if we're just doing some basic math here, instead of adding a fourth competition squat session, which is only going to give us 40% return on our training investment, we could add a front squat session, which is going to give us 50%. Even though it's not 100%, it's still more than we would get by doing the same thing again. So as you can see, these extreme approaches where you have 100% specificity or 100% non-specificity, like Westside, are both a bit suboptimal. You need an appropriate level of variation, which generally means that you're still doing most of the volume on the competition movements, but you're doing a large portion on variations as well. So in my opinion, as an overall squat program, Smolov is probably a bit too specific. Now, in terms of overloads, Smolov just employs basic progressive overload. It's a percentage-based program where each week you handle heavier and heavier weights. And in fact, in the base mesocycle, it's actually a linear progressive overload where you're just adding more weight each week to increase the stimulus. In the intense phase, the percentages are raised, and what you do is you end up doing more reps in sets above 90 and even 95%. But again, Smolov uses basic progressive overload. Fatigue management on Smolov is kind of a tricky subject because the whole point of Smolov is actually to outstrip your ability to recover from fatigue. It is a shock cycle. The base mesocycle is supposed to F you up. It's supposed to kick your butt. It's supposed to force your body to adapt because of how extreme it is. So the whole idea is that it causes you to flirt with overtraining. Now, Smolov does do some things to help manage this fatigue. For example, you're not allowed to do any other lower body work during this program. You're not allowed to deadlift. The second thing is that it uses advanced block programming to help you manage fatigue between the different phases. As you'll recall, you get a 2-week deloading phase called the switching phase in between the base mesocycle and the intense phase. Overall, though, it's pretty clear that if you just read people's experiences on the internet, that there's tons of people out there who just cannot handle Smolov. It breaks them. It's too much. So unless you're just really attracted to extreme approaches and you want to prove something to yourself about your mental toughness, there's no real reason to do this program. Nobody needs that much volume. Again, it's designed as a shock cycle to force your body to adapt to something extreme. This is not something that you would do multiple times a year or even once every year. The bottom line is that no one needs this level of volume to make progress. Remember guys, there is an optimal dose-response relationship between volume and training effect. Take a look at this chart again. If we were to place Smolov on this chart, it would exist in the upper right-hand corner of the chart. Smolov really knocks on the door of approaching the point where the amount of volume you do actually surpasses the training effect that you get. Just to give you an example, starting strength is famous for producing 5-pound PRs after doing 3 sets of 5. So you're getting about 1 pound of PR per 5 reps. Even if you got the 100 pounds that people claim you can get on Smolov, you will have done approximately 900 working reps to get that gain. In other words, the efficiency is about half of that of a basic program like starting strength. And that's only if you get a 100-pound gain. Not many people get 100 pounds out of Smolov. It just isn't necessary or optimal to do a program like Smolov. I know I'm getting repetitive, but that is the truth. Most people actually lose a significant portion of their gains once they finish the program, and that actually makes perfect sense. Let's think about why. What do you have to do when your body adapts to high volume in order to make more progress? Well, you have to do even higher volume. But here's the thing about Smolov. What program out there is more volume than Smolov? Almost nothing. So any program that you switch to is going to cause at least some detraining because you're going so far backwards in terms of the volume. This means that Smolov is not a great idea for long-term consistent progress. It's a short-term boost at best. In my opinion, most of the people who want to run Smolov are being outright impatient and greedy. They'd rather spend 3 months, no matter how hard those 3 months are, to add 100 pounds to their squat rather than getting slow, consistent, steady progress and adding 100 pounds to their squat over 2 years. However, in the long run, what is going to be better? After those 2 years, you can just keep making that steady progress if you're doing it the right way. After Smolov, what do you go to next? In my opinion, 99% of you guys would be better taking the long, slow, boring, harder approach of being consistent. Now, in terms of individual differences, Smolov is a percentage-based shock cycle, so it doesn't actually account for individual differences at all. And in some ways, this is appropriate, because if you tried to auto-regulate the volume that you were doing on Smolov, you'd probably just end up not even doing half of the original intended volume. You'd auto-regulate yourself into something way more sane. That said, if you're an advanced athlete who's considering doing this program, you put yourself in a pretty precarious position. Because there is no auto-regulation, you just have to hope that you're one of the people out there who fits into the range that Smolov will work for. For a lot of other people, it's just going to be too much, and they're going to end up either quitting or getting hurt. So the bottom line is that even though it kind of doesn't make sense to auto-regulate on Smolov, there are shock cycles out there that do incorporate auto-regulation, so Smolov can't rate highly on individual differences. In fact, Smolov ignores individual differences. At this point, Smolov is just an absolutely iconic program. There's a lot of people out there who basically feel like you should do it at least once just to prove your manhood, if nothing else. But here's the thing, I don't believe that doing this program is optimal for your long-term powerlifting progress. First of all, if you're a beginner or an early intermediate, you need to stay away from this program. While it's tempting to get those huge gains, you guys can already make fantastic progress on simpler programs, so you should be. Go for that long-term consistency instead of the temptation of the short-term boosts. Now for you advanced athletes, you really have to weigh the potential risks and the potential benefits of the program. So keep in mind, this is not a program for your total. You're not going to be able to deadlift. You're probably not going to be able to do the same amount of upper body volume that you normally do. You're going to have to gain some weight. You have a pretty decent shot of quitting or getting hurt. And the program isn't going to be sustainable, and it's not what's best for your long-term progress. So then, what are the potential benefits for an advanced athlete? Well, as an advanced athlete, if you're knocking on the door of a squat record, maybe it makes more sense to put your total on the back seat for a little bit so that you can ensure that you go out and get that record and put your name in the record book. In really any other situation, I'm not sure why you would risk the injury to do a program that you simply don't need to do, because there's so many other things you can do to make your squat go up that don't involve you squatting 4 times a week, not deadlifting at all, and lowering your bench volume. There's things that are just more conducive to improving your total rather than just your squat. And what about for everyone else? Well, in my honest opinion, you guys should do yourself a favor and commit to long-term, steady, consistent progress. Stop asking yourself what program out there is going to add 50 pounds to your squat in 8 weeks. It's a trap. You're looking for the holy grail, and it doesn't exist. Instead, what you should be focusing on is creating your own method that helps you to add 50 to 100 pounds to your total every single year for 10 years. Because you want to know the truth? That's a lot closer to what the all-time greats in this sport did versus adding 100 pounds to their squat in 13 weeks. There's a saying in powerlifting that the brightest stars burn out the fastest, and that couldn't be more true in the case of a program like Smolov. Stop looking for shortcuts. Go for the long-term, steady, consistent progress. Do the program that has you doing simple, boring, mundane things consistently until you achieve mastery, because that is really the foundation of success in powerlifting and really any endeavor that you want to participate in life. Now, I promise I'm not going to go off on a philosophical bent on you guys, but here's the thing. I know consistency isn't as sexy as Smolov, but in the long run, it's what's better for your progress. It's what's optimal. I really can't recommend that you guys go out and do Smolov unless you just want the personal challenge or you're close to a record. In virtually every other case, I just think there's more intelligent, more optimal options out there for you. Moving forward, after receiving multiple requests, I've decided that the next program we'll be reviewing is Base Building by Paul Carter. Now, I've actually never looked at this program before, so I'm excited to dig in and see what it's all about. If you're a big fan of Paul Carter, make sure you check back in to see this next review. If you guys found this content interesting, informative, or entertaining, please like, share, and send it out into the interwebs for me. If you have any questions or comments whatsoever, feel free to head over to the PowerliftingToWin.com forums, and I will answer any issues that you have personally. Subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to check out PowerliftingToWin.com for more great powerlifting information. Have a nice day.